Okay, so a few days ago I put a poll up on my community tab asking you all which video you wanted to see next. One was a challenge run and the other two were reviews. I like to think that you guys are interested in either of these two video genres and thought that any of the three choices would have been solid ones. A Crab's Treasure and Dead Island 2 are two games I've played recently and have a fully formed opinion on, and I still plan on making those videos. But as for right now, it seems y'all want to see some challenges. The third and ultimately winning video idea was the one you're sitting here watching right now. Today I'm going to be completing all the Witcher contracts with only my crossbow. And man, are y'all going to regret this one. As I mentioned in a previous video, I sometimes run these challenges twice if I felt the first one wasn't enough of a challenge. Well, it happened again. I initially started this challenge from New Game Plus because I wanted to have access to the mutations from the Blood and Wine DLC, and I knew the enemies would scale up with my level and still potentially provide me with a challenge. So I hopped onto my sign build save file, then proceeded to do all the things I needed to get my mutations. More specifically, the Cat Eyes mutation. This would greatly raise the damage of my crossbow by 700%, grant me 50% crit chance, and cause my bolts to pierce and stun enemies. And also give my first shot landed the power to instantly delete 15% of my opponent's health. Now, all this combined sounds kind of overpowered, but the most powerful thing out of all of these, the thing that essentially ruined my first run, was the stun. This aspect of this particular mutation allowed me to basically pin my enemies up against a wall or into a corner and just mindlessly scroll TikTok while constantly tapping RB, not really providing much of a challenge. The reason I made it so far into the challenge before resetting was because I kept holding out hope that I would eventually run into a worthy opponent that wouldn't be perturbed by my mutation. That foe never arrived, and so I packed my bags and left back to the main menu to start a brand new game, starting back again at level 1. Before we start, I want to throw out a few caveats I had to implement for purposes of maintaining my sanity. First, I'm allowing the use of Yrden on any Wraith-type creatures. Full stop. I tried to make it work, but it would literally take hours. Secondly, there are like 3 or 4 contracts that I didn't end up completing because they required me to go through some main story quests before getting access to them, and I wasn't about to subject myself to that Sherlock Holmes simulator again. So let's just forget those ever existed and carry on with our lives. Thirdly, for the majority of this run, I spawned in all of my special bolts, simply because the amount I was going to need for this challenge far surpassed what any traders could supply me with. This also evens out the difficulty from being impossible to doable, just like the first caveat. Also, things like explosive bolts aren't available until level 13, and the highest level I ever hit on this run was 10, so there was by no means any cheese here. Fourthly, I was allowing myself access to places of power if I organically came across them. Turns out the only one that applied to was one place of power right at the beginning. And the last thing is, thank you all for being here and supporting my content. I really enjoy making these videos, even though they sometimes raise my blood pressure. But truly, just thank you. Okay, White Orchard. The first and only contract in White Orchard is Devil by the Well. After slaying the Griffin with Vesemir and attending an audience with the king, I get to work on this contract. I left Vizima and went back to White Orchard to hit up the notice board and initiate the quest. After talking with the issuer and negotiating my pay, I head out to the well that's believed to be haunted. I used my Witcher senses to find clues as to what happened here and how I could go about resolving it. I scanned the area quickly, then jumped into the well to find a bracelet that looked like it belonged to a woman, as well as a skeleton hanging from the well's rope. I went back up and around to search some more until I gathered all the clues. I deduced I was dealing with a Noon Wraith, so I gathered up her remains and lit them on fire to get her to reveal herself. Since I'm allowing myself access to Yrden for these enemies only, I open up by placing one down and luring her into it so I could do proper damage. Otherwise, I'd just be fighting a Spirit Wraith doing 1 damage per arrow. Don't worry, you'll get your cake, trust me. The main strategy of this fight is to just dodge around, casting Yrden whenever I could, and shooting out regular old bolts since that's all I had this early into the game. They do pretty decent damage, and Noonwraiths attack and move very slowly, making this fight a good warm-up. Every so often though, she will vanish into thin air and summon 3 clones from the ground to suck the life force out of you and return it to herself. I obviously want to avoid this at all costs, so whenever I notice her doing this, I sprint as far away and as fast as I can, looking back to see when the real her spawns back in, letting me know it's safe to come back. She did this between 4 to 6 times during my fight with her, but there's really nothing else to say about her. She died and I collected some money. Now I was off to Velen to hit up all the notice boards and collect all the contracts in the area. That way I could just knock them out one by one, starting from the easiest contracts into the area to the hardest. Starting with Woodland Beast. If you've ever played The Witcher 3, you've likely done this contract. The completion of this contract will award you with an authentic pass to cross the bridge as you're making your way toward Crow's Perch. After getting the contract off the notice board near this bridge, I head to the now marked location to look for clues. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by 2 owl ghouls. For anyone who doesn't know, owl ghouls are ferocious motherfuckers, but most importantly, they regenerate their health extremely fast, way faster than I could dish it out with my crossbow. This is where I went digging for a way around having to fight these bastards, or any way to stop their regeneration. That's when I discovered the tracking bolt. The tracking bolt's name is deceiving because it does more than what the name suggests. Yes, it will track your target, but it'll also apply a bleed. If the target can bleed, that is. Luckily, owl ghouls can. So after a quick trip to a local vendor to retrieve some of these bolts, I went about kiting one away so I could finish him off alone, then went back to do the same to the other. Once I rid the area of these beasts, I scanned around the area for more clues. A trail of footsteps led me to a nearby Skellige camp, who allowed me an audience with their leader under the stipulation of leaving my weapons at the door. I oblige and proceed into their camp. I had a pretty civil conversation with the leader, leaving there without a fight, which led me back to the guard at the bridge to give him the news and complete the contract. Starting Patrol Gone Missing was like every other quest on this list. It started by getting the contract from the contract issuer. In this case, it was Egebrod, located in the Nilfgaardian Group Center camp. He'd lost contact with a group of his men while they were traveling just a bit west from here, near the House of Respite. Upon reaching the camp, I did some investigating using my Witcher senses and found some footprints. I followed the footprints until a wyvern suddenly popped out of the trees and challenged me to a fight. At this point in the run, I hadn't fully committed to spawning in all my arrows just yet, so I used all the precision arrows I had to deal pretty pitiful damage, to be honest. But what was way worse was the 1 damage from the regular and tracking bolts. Fortunately, I had enough tracking bolts for the bleed to proc for the rest of the fight, dealing 4 damage every half a second or so. So the constant shooting was just for something to do as the bleed slowly killed the wyvern. I managed to find a neat little dead zone in the map's terrain, which confused the AI into thinking that it had no way to get to me. Of course I'm going to be using this more moving forward, but can you blame me? This shit is painful. After my victory, I went back to the Eggman to report the kill and collect my reward. Moving on to the next contract. Shrieker is the 4th contract on the list, beginning and ending right around Crow's Perch. The contract is given by an old man right inside the town's walls, and he tells me of a kid whose father had been slain by a nearby beast. I find the kid around the backside of the home and have a chat with him to try and find out any other information, but he's really no use to me, just whining about his dead dad. How pathetic. With the little information I was able to obtain, I set out towards the Shrieker's lair and proceeded to lure him out using a grapeseed bomb. Now that it was scared out of its nest, the fight was on. This time, and against this enemy, my tracking bolts were doing 17 damage with 15 bleed damage, which was way more efficient than the last fight. Though I don't know their health pool difference and I have no way of finding that out. Either way, I took it as a win. This fight went off without a hitch. It was a fairly simple fight full of dodging around trees, tricking the enemy AI. Things were going pretty well, until my game crashed out of nowhere. This sent me back all the way to the beginning of the fight. Whatever. The second time was just like the first, dodging and shooting over and over and over again until it's dead. Then take its head to the man in Crow's Perch in exchange for his money. Moving on to the contract Jenny of the Woods, it's yet another wraith. This is a pretty simple contract. You just gotta do some detective work, find an item that belonged to them, and then wait until they show up. Jenny is a night wraith, so I needed to meditate until nighttime to be able to fight her. Wraiths are immune to all status effects such as bleed, so there's really no point in using anything other than regular old bolts on these monsters. Using Yrden to materialize her, I'm able to deal a consistent 18 damage per shot, like the last one. The entire fight was just a cycle of placing Yrden, baiting her into it, then shooting to get as much damage off as possible before she would exit. Like the last Wraith I fought, Jenny will occasionally blast off and create 3 clones that will sap your life force and give it to Jenny. Again, I can't let any health be gained back because of this incredibly slow process. So I used the exact same strategy of just running away every time she did this, and everything was fine. This fight went on for so long that it started at midnight and lasted all the way up until 10:30 a.m. the next morning. I saw the sunrise and all. There's been a monster terrorizing a local village's cemetery, and I'm the guy for the job. I picked up this contract, made an agreement with the issuer, then set out to find what's causing the ruckus. I came up to the cemetery to 4 dogs that I tried putting down as humanely as possible from the barriers of the cemetery wall, since the dogs wouldn't dare leave their pre-programmed area. After euthanizing the 4 vicious animals, I proceeded to inspect a few graves for clues. I found the one I needed, and it had a scent that led me to a nearby cabin. In here, I would find clues that would lead me to believe I was dealing with a grave hag. An effigy of skulls was found inside the cabin, and by taking them away from here and to the graveyard, I was sure to piss it off enough to lure it out of hiding. Sure enough, later that evening, Morntart showed her ugly face to stand up to the defiler of her home. Now, she was a physical entity, meaning that she was definitely capable of bleeding. Oh yeah, 20 base damage off of a tracking bolt with a solid 17 points per bleed. She was cooked. This grave hag was actually one of the more active fights in this challenge. No glitches or gimmicks. This one was a true honest-to-God fight. I kited Morntart in circles around the crypt-like building, dodging any time she would leap at me or anything of the sort, and eventually I claimed victory and collected my reward. I was now off to Lindenvale to collect my next contract. It was here that I learned about a monster killing a nearby pack of wolves, so I went out to investigate the site of the alleged mauled wolves. I picked up on some tracks, which then led me to catch a whiff of an unfamiliar scent. This scent brought me to a cave with a dead fiend in it. Odd. I investigated the cave some more to find 2 sets of footprints, and I concluded I'm, in fact, dealing with a chort. To lure the chort to me, I now needed to collect some feces from the fiend and 2 crow's eyes. Both are found nearby. After creating the lure, I now needed to spread it around a few places in the area, afterwards going back to the cave to initiate the fight. After encountering the chort, I failed on more than a few occasions because it was such a small space and quite a large monster. I also started this fight low on arrows, and at this point I wasn't committed to spawning them all in, so I went back and crafted some at the Oxenfurt blacksmith. I came back bearing a full pack of arrows of all kinds, looking to find the best one against the chort. Of course, I led with tracking arrows since I knew it was capable of bleeding, hitting for 20 damage and 24 bleed, the most I've seen yet. I then moved on to try the blunt arrows to get a measly 6 damage, and with the regular bolts, just 1. So I safeguarded all the tracking arrows I had to have a constant bleed on it, then whittled away slowly with whatever blunt bolts I had. The fight was pretty casual, lots of dodge rolling and getting in shots when I could, but then there came a time where I rolled over the dead body of the fiend. This caused the chort to freak out and begin running crazily around the cave. This was an odd find, but I'd obviously use it to my advantage. This dude had a ton of health and I was not doing a whole lot of damage. This fight lasted around 11 minutes until I think he just accepted his fate, finally running over to me and essentially asking me to end his suffering. Assuming he got stuck in a few polygons, I went ahead and easily rapid fired the rest of my bolts until his health hit 0 and his body went limp. I then proceeded to collect my trophy and report back to the contract giver for my reward. Now, after this contract, I gained a level, bringing me up to level 4, and I want to take a moment to talk about where I've invested my points so far. I'd collected 1 place of power and was level 4, so I'd already invested in 2 general perks and 2 combat perks. And up until this point, I only had 2 slots available, so I went ahead and selected the 2 general perks because they gave me much more than either combat perk. One gave me an extra bolt between reloading, and the other an extra 25% damage with the crossbow, which would both help versus some of the more aggressive enemies. And at this point in time, I didn't really have any combat perks that would help me specifically, and I should have invested more into this branch so I could get the ones I actually wanted, but I knew I wasn't going to gain enough levels for this, so I opted to spend the new point on Gourmet. These boss fights can get pretty long, so slowly healing all the time would be just a huge benefit. Okay, so now back to the contracts. I was now off to Honorton to talk to a Nilfgaardian officer, Milan, and it was here that I learned about some men who went missing over in the Byways. Upon arrival to the Byways, it's clear that ghouls have overrun this village. 4 of them to be exact. These things were far beyond my level, and my only chance of survival was to get them by themselves. By doing this, I can pin these little shits into a corner since my bolts cause them to flinch. Also, I need them each alone so I don't have to juggle multiple ghouls at a time. At the beginning, I managed to get one all alone because my pal Roach was holding the aggro of the other 3. Good boy. Of course, I had to use the ever-faithful tracking bolts on these things because they're very good at regenerating their health. Unfortunately, the bleed is only hitting for 5 damage, but the bolts are doing 24, so I can't complain. During this fight, I remembered I'd made more blunt bolts in between the contracts and decided I would give them a shot. To my surprise, they did 32 damage. I'd finally found a use case for these fucking things. However, I quickly ran out of those and went back to my reservoir of tracking bolts for the rest of this fight. Then, my dumbass went on to spawn in more tracking bolts, but not the blunt bolts. What the fuck was I thinking? Anyway, after killing that lone wolf, I turned to the other 3. I found a spot where I could linger on their aggro boundary and would get them bouncing between me and Roach, trying to keep them all bleeding so I wouldn't lose progress on the fight. This was kinda hard to do since their very sporadic movements made it near impossible to keep track of them. I eventually found my groove and put them all down. After doing so, 2 men came out of one of the houses looking very suspicious. After doing some convincing, I get the secret out of them. Apparently, they were concealing the discovery of a monster they'd found as they were doing some tunneling under their village. They caved in the tunnels, but the beast didn't die, it just locked it in. I ventured into the tunnels and came across an Ekimara named Sarasti. We started our battle fairly normally. Lots of dodging and phase shifting. I got a decent amount of his health down with just some tracking bolts, and just as I'm getting low on health myself and I'm about to die, I roll into yet another broken area. Much like the previous fight, I can now just stand here and rip arrow after arrow at him until he succumbs to his wounds. Now, the Beast of Honorton is a pretty straightforward contract. I was led to an unmarked town in Velin, and upon approaching the town, I come face to face with 3 Owlghouls. Now, these things are fucking vicious, as I found out earlier. They're aggressive as all hell, and also have the ability to regenerate their health. Since I'd fought 2 of these before, I was no stranger to their attacks. I stumbled upon a roof I could climb on, but the pathing of the Owlghouls was so inconsistent that I would only hit like 40% of my shots. I instead settled for a fenced-in area that they couldn't get to, but I could still freely shoot at them. My tracking bolts were doing 41 damage per shot, but a pitiful 5 bleed damage. After working my way through the 4 enemies, I get a chance to survey the area, and come to find out the entire town was slaughtered, but not by Owlghouls. I found a scared and alone child who was yelling at me about a man who looked just like me, having the same cat eyes, who was responsible for the slaughter. I vowed to her I would find that disgraced witcher and bring vengeance to her loved ones. And I did just that. I found the fucker whom I was after, and I told him I was here to fight. Using the everlasting tracking bolt bleed, I was now able to secure a Gil on Gaten and report the good news to the orphaned little girl. I was even nice enough to bring her to her aunt so she had someone who would take care of her, finalizing the end of this contract. Missing Brother was the last contract in Velin, and dear God, was it a rough one. I got this contract from the bartender at the inn in the Crossroads who said his brother had gone missing. He'd been gone a bit longer than usual after he was last seen running off with some of the local strumpets. I confirmed my rate with the man and set off to go looking in the last known location, hoping to find something useful. The caves just northeast from the inn is where I was off to, and upon arrival began my trek into the dark-ass cave system, lighting as many torches as possible and spawning in some arrows for the upcoming fight. And this was all before I knew you could command spawn multiples of things, so I was stuck doing it this way for a little while. I gathered some clues and inspected a few mutilated corpses, then proceeded to find the exit. Realizing I hadn't yet slain the beast, I turned around to find out where I was supposed to go. I found an underwater cave I could swim through that was sure to bring me to its nest. Once on the other side, I came across a brand new enemy, a spider. I don't like where this is headed. I began this encounter much like all the others thus far by attempting to apply a bleed, and then figure out which arrow did the most damage. And in a turn of events, the bleed was actually quite pitiful. However, the precision bolts were quite the opposite. Even while dishing out pretty decent damage, just this one spider took a whole 2 minutes to kill. I really hope this isn't your typical spider fight with like a million of these things.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
After killing off that spider, I came up to a more open part of the cave and discovered the man's brother's corpse, then began suddenly seeing a bunch of red dots appear on my minimap. Lovely. I backed off immediately, going back out the way I came, kiting and shooting 3 spiders as I did this, trying to do as much damage as possible. My idea was to fight these little fuckers back here, away from the main boss for obvious reasons. I needed to kill them all before fighting the big bad. So I'm sitting there, dodging around, popping off shots as often as I can, not really doing a whole lot, but slowly chipping away little by little. Amidst all my dodging around, I found myself backing into some water. It was the water cave I came in from, and the spiders were following me. And so it got me thinking, the crossbow works underwater, right? I wonder if I could keep these spiders stuck underwater as I relentlessly hammered away at them. The answer wasn't just a resounding absolutely, but a holy fucking shit, dude. Underwater, the crossbow was the shit. So I quickly took out these 3 mobs and went back to find the one that didn't initially follow me to send him to the same fate as his siblings. But this one was a stubborn son of a bitch. He would not follow me into the water. It got to the point that I had to trick shot this bitch from under the water to deliver the boost of damage and kill him while he was still on shore. What a crazy crossbow hack. Too bad I couldn't really use this against the monster. Honestly though, would it have made this contract faster? Hell yeah. But would it have made it easier? No. This is because Mr. Fatbags over here flinches every time he gets shot by my crossbow. Interestingly enough, this enemy has way more bleed damage being done to it than its underlings, and precision bolts only do 1 damage to it. 1. There were no worries though, since I spawned in plenty of tracking bolts to get this job done fairly smoothly. I also think this is one of the first fights I realized that if I had an enemy pinned in a never-ending flinch, I could aim down the sights and fire off my 2 arrows way faster than if I was shooting from the third person. So that was good to know. At a point in the fight, it eventually turns purple and lights up the area. Nothing changed about the fight, but I guess I thought it was notable. After slaying the beast, I went back to the inn and selected the wrong dialogue options, so I never got paid for the job. All is well though, since I did level up and put the point into a combat tree since I don't know what else to do with it, so that's cool. Anyway, on to Novigrad. Into the town of whores and thieves, we arrive upon a man looking to solve an imp problem. I question him briefly to find out more info, decide on a price, and begin my quest to find the supposed thief. I follow the tracks, find the scent, then find the man. He's a Doppler. I called him out on his disguise and that sent him running for his life. I quickly caught up to him and called him out for his crimes, and he retaliated by turning into a clone of me and challenging me to a fight. Big skill gap as I wiped the floor with his shape-shifting flinching ass. Look at this dude, he's making a fool out of me. I eventually bring him down to about 1/3 of his health, which forces him to stop the fight and assume his regular form, pleading for his life. I'm not backing down and end up having to do the fight pretty much all over again, since he gets a full health bar after this quick breather. I apparently didn't notice the precision bolt damage I could dish out and opted for tracking bolts instead for some reason. It was pretty much just a reskin fight of the one I just had, except this time he was ultimately put to rest for good. I reported back to the merchant for my reward and went off to find my next contract. For this contract, I head out to a place I never knew existed in this game, Honeyfill Meadworks, to talk to some halflings about the issues they were having. They tell me about a beehive of theirs that's frozen solid and how one of their men died from severe frostbite. They agreed to show me the affected hive so I could do a bit of sensing. I picked up on a track and began following it, leading me past some enemies I didn't really want to deal with, so I took the long way around the lake, finally arriving at a locked cellar. One of the halflings came up behind me and gave a sob story about something or another, then proceeded to give me the keys. I opened the door to find a surprise. It's not a phantom at all, it's a stray wild hunt dog. It was weird to see it away from its pack, but needed to be taken care of regardless. Opting to lure it out of the cellar for a more open area to dance around in, I began cycling my bolts, concluding that none of them would give me an advantage in this fight. For this fight, I would solely rely on the bleed damage to finish this one off for me. Basically just dancing around and shooting at it as to not bore myself to death. No, that special contract will be saved for last. Out in the open fields, I was able to do something I never knew was possible, sprinting while shooting the crossbow. I think I was just far enough away from my target for this to work as long as it did. I'm certain this is exactly how the developers wanted the game to behave. Anyway, lights out for Frost Doggy and back to Honeyfield to collect my reward. The contract issuer for Deadly Delights was in Novigrad, out by the docks. He was a grumpy guard posted up by one of the many bridges in town. He was quite a cheap bastard, but I was still able to coax a couple more pennies out of him. After accepting the contract, I went to locate my target. I started by examining the area of the incident. I found what appeared to be a two-legged horse's tracks fresh in the mud. Following this concerning lead, I went on to find a perfume bottle that I was able to get a scent I could follow further. It led me to a house with a dazed man standing out front, babbling like a crazy person in a trance. Signs are pointing towards a succubus. The door was locked, so I had to enter from the rooftops by climbing into a neighboring building and crossing over to an open window. After getting inside and descending the stairs, I came face to face with the aforementioned succubus. Now, there is an option to convince her to leave town and not fight, but I ain't no bitch, so I flat out refused to listen to anything she has to say and cut right to the chase. Now, this bitch has some ridiculous spells that she can cast right next to me and hit me with before I can even get a shot off. But from my prior experience with this fight, I knew the appropriate solution was to go upstairs and wait until she calmed down and went idle, sitting back where she was when I met her. Once she was in place, I would slowly creep back down the stairs with weapon drawn, ready to unload as many bolts as I could before she would spawn in one of her homing fireballs. I managed far better in this fight than I was ever able to on my first go around, which was weird since I was way more equipped with buffs on New Game Plus. But I don't know, it worked flawlessly this time and I was able to lock her into a long stun combo several times, chunking away huge damage each time. Once she lay dead, I harvest my trophy and collect my reward just like all the other contracts. Yeah, so I guess I forgot to hit the record button while I ran this contract, but here's where the beauty of running this challenge technically twice comes in handy. So the only proof I have of me doing it on this save file is the fact that it's in my completed contracts, but other than that, you just gotta trust me. But for what it's worth, here's a hypercut of my New Game Plus build versus the White Lady with no Yrden.
NANI?!
We'll come back to this one. For this contract, we begin just outside Novigrad at a fishing shack known as Cunny of the Goose to meet with the contract giver, Breen. He tells me of some workers for his business getting attacked by something out in the woods and only one of them survived and that I should go talk to him for more information. After working out a price, I agreed and take the contract. It was at this point I discovered I could spawn in stacks of bolts now. I naively entered 3,000 and way overshot what I thought I could carry, leading me to pull an Uno reverse and immediately drop them. After my discovery, I continued my quest by talking to the survivor of the attack and learning where it all took place so I could find out what happened. He pointed me in the general direction, so I set off en route to the area described and began following some wagon tracks, eventually coming across the bloody bodies of the rest of the group. The results of my investigation determined that I was dealing with a Leshen and needed to find its totem so I could destroy it and lure it out. In order to find the totem, I would need to scout out a few areas that had flocks of crows lingering, as they were the loyal servants of Leshens. Since I'd done this quest previously, I didn't need to go around looking at every single spot and beeline straight to the correct one, arriving at the totem and using Ard to destroy it. Once I got the Leshen to appear, we began our I quickly deduced that the tracking bolts were the optimal DPS and started chunking away at Home Dude's health bar. This dude and his crows can fuck right off. They took me out more times than I'd like to admit, but how in the fuck do you even dodge this garbage? After many deaths and expletives yelled, I was finally able to pull it off with the help of some unexpected NPCs and an autosave. Once I got the Leshen named Kernoon down to about a third of its health, he summoned in these bitch-ass dogs for help, turning this fight into a 4v1. I turned my focus to these wolves since they were fast as fuck and could kill me in just a couple of hits. There were 3 of them to take on, so I went full extra sweat on their asses, utilizing the Leshen's attacks against them as much as I could. He would use this root attack thing that came up from the ground and sprung up to pierce me, but I would just lure the wolves close enough to me, bait out this move from the Leshen, and roll away, leaving the poor wolves to be euthanized by their master. After dealing with them, my focus was back on Kernoon, chunking down his health one tiny tick at a time. Once his health was down to about a quarter, he summoned again another 5 dogs. What an annoying little cunt. Luckily for me, at some point during this 6v1, there were some roaming NPCs that made their way into this fight to assist me by killing a few of these ankle-biting fuckers. I kept fighting the wolves, trying to kill them all by the same methods as earlier, until they killed me. To my surprise, the game had saved somewhere recently, and so my setback wasn't all that bad. From here, I died a few more times, but then ultimately took out the wolves, and subsequently Kernoon. Grabbing my trophy and going back to Cunny the Goose, I tell Breen what happened and that the problem was resolved. This contract is probably one of my favorites. It was a bit more engaging than some of the others in terms of the setup. There was still this cookie cutter investigation using Witcher senses like normal, but after figuring out what lures it, I get to have some fun. You see, I deduced that I was dealing with a vampire who preferred the blood of the drunk and disorderly. So I had to get drunk and act like a fool, shouting around in the area he prayed in.
Tight at night she'd be loose tomorrow. Early in the...
I eventually strike gold as he taunts me from the shadows, trying to get in my head. He eventually reveals himself, but unlucky for him, I'm not your average drunk. As per routine by now, I cycle my bolts to find the best one, and to no one's surprise, the tracking bolt was the winner again. The first few minutes of the fight, Geralt is still pretty drunk, so that was kind of annoying, but it didn't stay too long past its welcome. After doing a bit of damage to the vampire, a cutscene plays and it runs off. I take this time to save and regenerate my health, then follow the trail left by the Catacan. It led me to a shack on the outside of town that had locked doors, but a ladder to an open window. Once I got up and through, I dropped down and began to fight once again. Somehow, he now only had half his health. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but I wasn't about to complain. I died on my first attempt, but it didn't set me back that far. On my second try, I managed to roll up onto a body slumped in the corner, and this confused the enemy AI. It was no longer capable of finding or hitting me. I don't know how I stumble upon these every time, but again, I'm not about to complain. But wait, that's not entirely true. It did confuse it for a short while, but then he did manage to hit me while I was positioned here, so I had to roll to the opposite corner in an attempt to get away from him. And this corner was somehow even more powerful than the last. Honestly, CD Projekt Red, what is this? I'm not even trying to break your game. This just is your game. After a few minutes and hundreds of arrows, to no one's surprise, I came out victorious, took my trophy, and collected my coin. Blah, 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 story of dead people, blah, blah, negotiate for pay, blah, blah, investigate some corpses. Ooh, a fight. Nah, never mind. Oh, here though. Now, this is the kind of action I was waiting for. Another griffin. This should be pretty easy. Oh, and it was. The platform I was positioned on, the griffin never landed on. He would either be one level up and unable to hit me, or one level down and unable to hit me. Seriously, what's the challenge here? To see how long we could make these Witcher contracts? To be honest, guys, this is, I think, one of the lamest challenges I've done on this channel. The only difficulty up until this point has truly been my patience. It's basically a right bumper mashing simulator at this point. Now, I'd never done all the Witcher 3 contracts, which is kind of what spawned this whole challenge in the first place, but man did I overestimate these enemies. I don't think I've come across one that's been truly challenging. I'm hoping things will change in Skellige. Strange Beast. Get the contract, ask around, locate some tracks, find some drowners. You guys know the routine by now. And just as I was bitching about these contracts being too easy, here we get Hagubman, lord of these dudes. This is probably one of the squishiest beasts I've come across yet, but this little asshole came with a few friends. There are 3 points during this fight where this little bitch boy runs and hides underground and sends up 3 of his lackeys to fight for him. These pieces of shit are heavier duty than old Knob Gobbler here, making this fight 100 times harder and 100 times longer. I hated this fight so goddamn much. There's really not a lot to say about it other than the 3 pivotal points in the fight that interrupted my time with the real Knob Gobbler 9000. Such a little bitch boy fight, but I finally came out on top after many deaths. And the worst part was, there were no checkpoints. I had to do this whole fight in one life. But I did it, cut off that douchebag's head, got back into town, and collected my reward. I'm not even sure how to pronounce this one, but this contract is obtained in the main town in Skellige by Bjorg. Story of men who died, talk to the people involved, head to location marked on map, and enter an underwater cave. Alright, so once we're inside, I had to fight off 4 drowners before advancing any further, or they would just follow me. I finished them off and kept moving deeper and deeper into the cave, and after more investigation, I suspect a water hag is the culprit, and so I tucked myself behind a small alcove and waited for her to show up. She arrived with a couple of drowners, making this a 3v1. Nothing I haven't handled before. The fight began and I dove out of the alcove to begin focusing the drowners down since they were more of a nuisance than anything. Once I had them finished off, I was able to put my whole focus into the water hag. Now she was able to bleed, but took more damage from precision bolts, so they were my primary bolt of choice in this fight, but still making sure to top off the bleed as much as I needed to. Even though my brain had basically turned to mush at this point of the run, it still had some capacity to function throughout this battle. The reason I bring up my mental state is because this was another one of those more active fights out of all these contracts, the other being the hag I fought back in Velen. This one being more of a challenge since the quarters were a bit smaller, but hey, I still made it look pretty easy. Man go missing, brother think dead, fiance think live. Geralt go find out. So I enter the cave where this missing man was last thought to be, and upon entering, I'm greeted by a gang of 4 drowners. These are easily put to rest by abusing the ridiculously small aggro boundaries that these things have. Like, I can lure them to the edge of their boundary, then take 1 step back, forcing them to walk all the way back to water to hide, all while being shot in the back and stunned in their attempts. Boundaries are a pretty broken system in this game, if that wasn't obvious by now. Once I eliminated these 4, I moved on to the other room that had 4 more. At least I can abuse the same system with these ones as well. Once I'm finally rid of the drowners, I can advance onto the one I'm really here for in the first place, an echidna by the name Melusine. This enemy fought a lot like sirens or harpies. They're more effective in the air, which is next to impossible for them while I still have bolts to fire. Melusine was a worthless adversary for me, but she still managed to slay the man I was looking for. Oh well, it's not my husband. After defeating the beast and learning the news, I head back to talk to the brother and collect my coin to fulfill this contract. Now we're in Fairlund. I came across a group of Nordic-looking men shouting amongst themselves. They were arguing about whether or not a woodland spirit is killing at will, or if it's bolstering the masculinity of surviving kin. After not really caring one way or the other, if there was a beast, I was gonna slay it. I'd begun searching around the nearby woods. Finding clue after clue, I eventually stumbled into a pack of wolves, right in one of the areas I was supposed to be looking in. I tried to fight, but then decided to jump off a cliff and go check out the other places first. Well, they too had a pack of wolves near them, so I kept running into yet another pack of wolves, until eventually I got away from all of them, and ended up right where I needed to go. Perfect. It's another one of those Leshen things, and this time he got to spawn with the wolves up front. Fuck you. Regardless, I now knew how to use the Leshen's attacks against his pets, so I could quickly take care of them and focus on him. Though I often use it to my advantage, the flinch and knockback effects that each shot on this spirit would have would not serve me well. I would go on to push it directly into the wolves I outran earlier, leading me to an early grave. Okay, round 2. This time I have it in the bag. I know just what to do. I attempted to make short work of the wolves, just like last time, with the help of the Leshen. But my dumbass ran right back into that other pack of wolves. I'm so fucking stupid. Whatever, we're in this now. Let's go. I eventually killed them all and began working back on the Leshen. Since he wanted to flinch and take a step back every time I shot him, I figured I should just find something I could shove him against and just pin him there until he died. So that's just what I did. I pushed him literally inside of a tree, and the rest was up to Father Time. I totally forgot to press record at the beginning of this quest, so we're just gonna be getting right into the action. Hell, maybe that's what you wanted all along. Maybe me just yapping all the time gets on your nerves. I don't know, but I feel like I'm kind of trailing off here, so maybe let's just talk about this fight, huh? Okay, we're starting now. This fire rock troll named Wham-A-Wham is my target for this contract. After starting the fight and doing a small chunk of damage, the fight stops to have a brief conversation with the troll. Come to find that the miners were messing with him, and so he got aggressive with them and killed him. Totally reasonable, but that would be the easy way out. We're fighting this guy. Now, Wham-A-Wham is a very engaged fight, comparably. If you just try to fight him outright and dance around his cauldron like I did, he'll likely get you with this flailing windmill attack he comes at you with. I was suckered by this on multiple occasions before I hit record. Here's the last one I got on film. Anyways, I was theorizing how I could better evade this attack, and then I wondered if I set something in between us as he winds up for his attack, if he would be stuck running into said object. Well, the only thing in this room really was the cauldron in the middle of it, so I started with that. And boy, was that easy. That worked out way better than I thought. He just outright cancels the attack if there's an object placed between you. This was great news, so I played around the cauldron using it as a move canceller. The only problem with it is that it's a bit too tall and I couldn't shoot over it. Until I rolled up some rocks and got a vantage point on him, I was able to lock him in a never-ending cycle of flinching, and as long as any part of that cauldron was between me and him, he wouldn't do his charged attack. Now this works for a while, because he recovers rather quickly and takes a step forward for every one I push him back, sometimes sneaking in too, so he does gain ground every so often, which did lead me to have to find a new location to snipe him from. But that wasn't a problem because this whole stage is shaped like a bowl, where around the edges are higher than the center. I eventually pinned him into the wall and shot him till his last breath. A crazy man on one of them Skellige Isles speaks of a dragon he saw nearby. I refute his claims and tell him there's no such thing, but he sticks to believing what he saw, so I set out to prove him wrong. I stole one of his goats for bait and led out to the fields he claimed he saw this dragon. I was right as always, and it was no dragon, but a mere forktail. These things are incredibly stupid. Like I was saying, these things are incredibly stupid and can be kited around the trees and rocks and pretty much anything you can think of. This fight was pretty much a reskinned Shrieker fight, using tracking bolts to proc bleed and constantly fire while maneuvering around any of those aforementioned barriers. This was a pretty active fight. You do have to maintain your distance and barriers, but all in all, it's not particularly difficult. I'd compare it to something like driving a stick shift versus an automatic. One just gives you more to do while driving, and that's what this fight was. More to do. It was here in Skellige I'd come across Odin, and he was the next person on my list of contracts that needed fulfilling. His son Thor went missing near the ruins not far from the village. Some rogues filled his head with nonsense, and now he's just gone. It was now my mission to go up there and check on him. Turns out this place is well guarded by a fiend. These things are probably one of my favorites to fight, and it's because they provide a real challenge. Again, comparatively speaking. Running this quest with just a crossbow is as close to what I thought the rest of this challenge was gonna be like, but alas. At least we got the one. So fiends are interesting because they're massive, so they don't flinch. They play super aggressive and they have special abilities that suppress my ability to fire. This right here was the combo I was looking for. Thank God fiends are able to bleed because this one looks to have a pretty large health pool. Both the bleed and the tracking bolts seem to hit pretty hard, which gave me more confidence going into this fight. Most of this battle was dancing around, shooting when I could, dodge rolling the charged attacks, and trying to avoid his ability. At around half his health, the damn thing runs off. I thought that it was over, but nah, I gotta track it down and finish it off, of course. So I follow the tracks and locate Morvud once again. Oh yeah, his name's Morvud, by the way. To find Morvud back to full fucking health? What a scam! Well, now I guess I have to do that all over again, raw. No glitches, no exploits. No, I'm lying. Again, not by anyone's will but the game, I got Morvud thinking he's trapped in an invisible box. With close to half his health remaining, Morvud rammed himself into this predicament that would ultimately lead to his demise. Psh, Morvud? More like more dead. Last but not least, we have arrived at the climax of the run, the true gauntlet of Skellige's most wanted. First, I needed to collect the contract, get some info, then go find my target. I gathered all those things and arrived at the mouth of a cave, following the tracks that lead into it. As I went deeper into the cave, I was sprung on by 2 Endriga warriors that I managed to take out fairly easily, but not that quickly. This contract is miles above my level, so it took a long while of kiting and manipulation of flinches to kill them. As soon as the second one died and I thought this was over, 5 more came up out of the ground. No fucking way was I gonna survive this. Well, I did. I found a little pocket behind some stalactites that shielded me from their attacks and aggro and allowed me to open fire on them for the next 10.5 minutes. Then, after all those died, an Ericus shows up to spoil my victory. Oh, is this over yet? Whatever. I fought these before, I can kill it easily. It flinches at every fucking shot anyway. Once it's dead, I move deeper through the cave, hoping this ends soon. I came across a boot made out of Necker's foot and hand-drawn pictures of what looks like me and a plot to kill me. I'm gonna find out who's behind this. The idiots drew a picture of their meeting place, so obviously I'm gonna go there and wait for them to arrive. Come nightfall, they arrive, and it was the same motherfucker who gave me this goddamn contract, now trying to kill me. Great. Now I have the privilege to exact my revenge on this asshole and his goons. So there I was, up against an ice troll, a doppler, and a werewolf. Like I said, this was the gauntlet. I seek to take out the werewolf first since he seemed like the most immediate threat. In reality, he was truly just the most mobile. However, if the opportunity arose, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot either of the other 2. It took all of 5 minutes to take out their leader. Well, actually, I didn't even land the finishing blow. The troll did. Anyway, up next was the Doppler, since he was already at half health and the second fastest opponent. He was dead after another 3 minutes, and then it was just me and the ice troll, mano-y-mano. He was full health, so I knew that this would take a minute. Little did I know it would take another 10. Damn, that dude was tanky. Anyway, that was the end. I did it. All the contracts with the crossbow. I rate it, easy and boring. 3 out of 10, would never do it again. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see y'all next time. Wait, the video's not over? Oh no. No. Please, I'll do anything. Ugh. This is all your fault. Yeah, you, the viewer, or rather, the voter. Yeah, you chose this challenge run. This one right here. Over another crab's treasure? Dang. Well, I hope you're happy. As a reward to you for sticking around this long, you're obviously a dedicated viewer of mine, and I really appreciate y'all being here. This single Witcher contract is for your eyes only. Pure sadism. I know you want it. I know at least some of you knew what I was getting into here, and boy was the majority of this challenge not too bad. But this contract... This fucking contract right here was the single most painful experience in my entire gaming life. 2.3 hours on one fight, doing 1 damage with each bolt fired. Here's that entire fight boiled down into about 45 fucking seconds, so you don't have to suffer as I did. Just bear witness. Enjoy, and I'll see you fuckers later.